This game was done. It was dead and buried. The three-peat dreams were over. There was no chance that Penrith were going to come back in the final 20 minutes and beat Brisbane. History said it couldn't happen, but we all know it did. There were shades of the 2020 grand final going on here. Penrith looked impotent, Brisbane were on fire, and in fact Ezra Mam couldn't be touched. For 62 minutes of that game, Brisbane were impressive. But for the final 18 minutes, it was the match from hell. You know, interestingly, despite Brisbane leading by as much as they did with 60 minutes gone in the NRL Grand Final last year, on the stat sheet, it didn't look like they should have been that impressive or even have a lead as big as they did. And I know I probably sound like Phil Gould in 2020 saying Penrith were on top when they were trailing 20-0. Here's the stat line that you could see if you looked at it in the 60th minute. Possession, it was 50-50. Penrith, they had a 96% completion rate and they had 57% of the territory. Now, if I told you that and you didn't know anything else, you'd assume that the 2023 Panthers were well in front. But this is where those stats can be misleading and why I don't really like looking at those very top line stats. Because at that stage in the game, despite having all those nice looking stats, Penrith had conceded 7 line breaks and hadn't made one. Their only try had come off a short dropout where Brisbane forgot the fact that you're supposed to catch the ball after you knock it back towards your own try line. So in that situation, despite all of Penrith's dominance and their position on Brisbane's try line, they actually didn't need to break the Brisbane defensive line to score. In fact, they had actually missed 53 tackles to Brisbane's 27. And for a side like Penrith, who were known to strangle the life out of sides, 53 missed tackles is a huge number inside 60 minutes. But they actually got up the field fine. They had 20 tackles in the Brisbane red zone. They just weren't able to make anything stick, really. The reason is their attack looked listless, it looked aimless. They didn't really know what they were doing when they were attacking Brisbane's line. And then if you look at Brisbane's stat line, well, it seemed they were trying to invite the Penrith Panthers into the game at every opportunity. They made 9 errors and had only a 73% set completion rate. Hell, Penrith was showing their premiership medal by leading halfway through the first half. And things were only kind of evened up by Brisbane when Flegler crashed over just on half time. Nothing in that first half made sense if you just look at the stats lines. In that opening 40 minutes, Brisbane only had 42% of the ball, they had a completion rate of 60%, and they had made 300 fewer metres than Penrith. Yet they still kept out one of the best attacking sides in the competition and didn't give away a line break. Then, in the 20 minutes following half time, they completed at 92%, had 65% possession, scored 4 tries, and made 5 line breaks. But that's what Brisbane's season had been about. They're a pretty damn chaotic side. Where Penrith like to grind you down and beat you into submission, Brisbane's always, particularly in 2023, been about shock and awe. They have plenty of speed in the backline with plenty of dynamism, and of course the dreamy eyes of Reece Walsh. Pat Carrigan and Payne Haas run the engine room, but they don't even really have a full-time hooker. I mean, Billy Walters played there throughout 2023 and he only shifted there during the pre-season. Adam Reynolds is of course a known quantity, but his halves partner Ezra Mam seemed brilliant but erratic. The stats and scoreline after 62 minutes made very little sense. But very little of Brisbane's season actually made sense throughout 2023. Rugby league itself is an unpredictable game, so for Brisbane to lead wouldn't have been that weird, particularly in a grand final where sometimes freak things happen, but for them to lead by as much as they did was odd. Despite all that though, by full time we had a comeback for the ages and a brand new three-peat, the first in 40 years. Penrith did Penrith things while Brisbane kind of just imploded. Cleary was good. Undeniably, he was good. He was the best player on the park in those final 17 to 18 minutes for Penrith. Without him, they do not win the grand final. However, Brisbane really did implode. They did everything wrong they could in that final quarter of the game. They only managed 18 total play the balls. They completed only 2 of the 4 sets they were given and had 26% possession. On the flip side, Penrith has 74% possession. They completed 100% of their sets and they spent 78% of that period in Brisbane's half. Brisbane were forced to make more than double the tackles of Penrith, and they missed more than triple. While the Panthers also forced 2 goal line dropouts, they received a penalty and a set restart. Everything that Penrith needed to do in the final 20, they did. The air went completely out of Brisbane's young side. They had taxed themselves to the limit in that opening hour, and it kind of shows you the gap in experience between a Penrith side that was in its 4th grand final and knew what it took to win, and a Brisbane side that was kind of out there enjoying themselves, but was kind of unaware that this match gets played until the 80th minute. And you could see it in the 40-20 that Cleary delivered to kind of kick everything off. When he launched that kick, there was no one within cooey of him. There was no one putting pressure on him, and there was no one on Brisbane's defensive line getting up off the line to get in front of Penrith's faces. So all that extra defensive work they'd had to do in the earlier parts of the game was starting to catch up with them. Remember when I said that Penrith kind of set up shop on Brisbane's line in the first half? Well, all that extra defensive work meant they didn't have the gas anymore to keep coming off the line and trying to halt Penrith's momentum. If you look at both Stephen Crichton's try and Nathan Cleary's try, those are textbook examples of defensive lines that are completely fatigued and can no longer close the gaps. There's no one closing the gate behind them, and there are gaps being left open left, right and centre. But make no mistake, Penrith's final 20 minutes was a lesson in perfect execution. And whilst I've spoken a lot so far about Nathan Cleary, you really have to look at the impact given by Moses Leota and James Fisher-Harris. And James Fisher-Harris in particular has, since the grand final, gone on to lead New Zealand to a triumph in the Pacific Championship, and he's been awarded the Golden Boot, which he's more than deserving of. And it was really those two who drove Penrith's comeback. Without them, Cleary isn't given the time and space that he needs to pick apart Brisbane's fatiguing defensive line. In those final 17 minutes, Penrith made 136 post-contact metres and 436 running metres. That's 25% of their post-contact metres and running metres for the entire game. Which kind of makes sense. It's the final quarter of the game and they've made a quarter of the metres. However, if you look at Brisbane, they only made 10% of their post-contact metres and 12% of their total metres. Which means they made just 54 post-contact metres and 190 total metres in that final quarter of the game. Penrith's middle carried that ball with the same intensity in those final minutes as they did in the opening minutes of the match. Defensively, they completely dominated Brisbane and choked the life out of them. And honestly, if you give Cleary that type of platform, he's not going to pass it up. He's still one of the best halfbacks in the competition, and if you give him time and space, he'll tear you to shreds. There was no release valve, there was no way out for Brisbane. Once Penrith got on top and got on a roll, they weren't going to be denied and they weren't going to be turned away. Brisbane simply no longer had the gas in the tank to stick with Penrith. Cleary, of course, was awarded the Clive Churchill Medal, but if you could split it 3 ways, you probably should have. Leota and Fisher-Harris, their performance not just in carrying the ball but also in dominating a Brisbane middle that was still pretty good in Tom Flegler, Payne Haas and Pat Carrigan, went a massive way to Penrith's comeback. It's probably as close to an origin performance as you can get in club football. His team was on the back foot, they were down a huge score and they needed a moment of inspiration. Cleary delivered that with his 40-20 that he rifled into the sideline, and the try that he set up for Moses Leota was just about the best thing Penrith could have hoped for. It came almost virtually out of nothing and it got them on a massive roll. And the fact that it was one of Penrith's big bookend props who was supporting through the middle of the field shows you that Penrith are the ones that were going to come home with a wet sail. So Cleary's now done it in a grand final. He's pulled a match out of the fire. 2024 serves as the year that he can try and do that for New South Wales. Thank you very much for watching the video. If you liked it, please give the channel a subscribe and also like the video. It helps a lot. I'm hoping to continue doing this throughout 2024. So until next week, bye for now.